Comment on the video, where are people watching, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. At exactly midnight, the peaceful normalcy of the evening was shattered when three men, disguised as HOA officers, forcefully invaded the home of Detective John Mercer. In this meticulously crafted analysis of Part 1, we explore the atmosphere, the tactical method of intrusion, and the psychology behind the assault, all set against the backdrop of a moment that would redefine the boundaries between security and chaos. The intruders arrived under the deceptive guise of authority, using the highly recognized label HOA as their shield. Their mission was clear from the start: instill fear and extract compliance, leveraging the authority that the name HOA typically commands in a community. Detective Mercer's house, which for many nights had been a safe haven, suddenly became a stage for a ruthless performance. The impersonators used aggressive force without warning, shattering the household's sense of security within seconds. Their approach was brutal, leaving no margin for error and taking advantage of the unsuspecting tranquility of the neighborhood. The tactical precision with which these fraudsters executed their plan was alarming. They broke in violently, bypassing any semblance of due process, and targeted the detective's young son, a deliberate choice meant to amplify the psychological impact. By threatening his son, they were not merely executing a physical invasion but were aiming to destabilize the familial fabric and exploit vulnerable emotions. The demand for compliance was enforced under the weight of an unearned authority, as the imposters waved counterfeit credentials and mimicked official behavior with a rehearsed air of command. The ensuing chaos was not just about property violation, it was an assault on a trusted system of community governance. Detective Mercer, though off-duty, had long honed his instincts from years on the force. The sudden intrusion forced him to toggle between shock and rapid analytical thought. His first reaction was to preserve the well-being of his son, a response that soon gave way to a deeper recognition: these were not real HOA officials. Every detail of their behavior, their crude uniforms, the poorly executed threat, and the flimsy facades of authority, spoke volumes about the criminal enterprise behind the invasion. In that chaotic moment, the detective's mind raced through possibilities and consequences, weighing the threat of physical harm against the broader implications of these imposters operating in his community. Furthermore, the scene was a masterclass in psychological warfare. The intruders had carefully chosen the moment to strike, when the household was least guarded, both physically and emotionally. Their actions sent a clear message that no one was safe, that organized crime could wear the mask of legitimacy by clinging to labels like HOA. The intent was unmistakably clear: to terrorize the occupants into submission, to force a narrative where fear was the only response to authority, albeit an authority that existed only in their imagination. Ultimately, Part 1 of this unfolding drama is not just about a home invasion, it serves as an exploration of deception and the misuse of institutional trust. In one swift, devastating moment at midnight, the line between order and disorder was violently redrawn, leaving a family and a community to contend with the reality that fraud and fear can, with the right facade, penetrate even the most secure bastions of safety. In the dim light of early evening, Detective John Mercer, though off-duty, was winding down in his cozy living room. The room, adorned with framed photos of family milestones and service awards, resonated with a calm that belied the danger about to befall it. It was around 12:35 a.m. when the serenity was disturbed by an abrupt and forceful intrusion. The door slammed inward with a deafening crash, scattering shards of splintered wood across the polished hardwood floor. Mercer's heart pounded, but years of experience honed on the beat kept his instincts razor-sharp. Before he could rise, two of the intruders burst into the room with an air of theatrical menace. Their crude imitation of authority was evident in the garish, off-brand uniforms that boasted the insignia HOA in bold letters. In their rush, they overlooked the nuances of a genuine law enforcement presence. The commanding voice that filled the space was rehearsed yet hollow, as if practiced in front of a mirror by someone craving power. The sudden intrusion and the aggressive posture of the men were enough to send shivers down the spine of any ordinary person, but Mercer was anything but ordinary. As the impostor's eyes darted around the room, Mercer noted every detail: the cheap fabric of their uniforms, the awkward slouch of their shoulders, and the way they half-heartedly brandished their phony credentials. His immediate focus, however, was on his young son, who had been quietly playing in the adjacent room. The thought of his child being caught in the crossfire of this calculated burglary spurred Mercer to act swiftly, though he forced himself to stay silent for the moment. Inside, a maelstrom of thoughts collided. The detective weighed his options: engage immediately and risk unnecessary harm to his son, or delay his reaction until he could better assess the motives and potential threats posed by these impostors. As the intruders advanced further into the living room, their aggressive moves grew more brazen. They barked orders in a tone meant to evoke fear and submission, all the while oblivious to the subtle defiance that simmered in Mercer's calm, measured breaths. The confrontation was as much psychological as it was physical. The men, in their blind pursuit of exploiting the HOA's authority, seemed to relish the disturbance they had created. For Mercer, however, each moment was a delicate balancing act between protecting his family and preserving the integrity of a situation that could escalate into chaos. His mind raced, cataloging every movement of the intruders, every misplaced step, and every chink in their fabricated armor of authority. In that charged moment, the living room became a stage upon which the forces of deception and justice were about to clash. Mercer's training over decades on the force allowed him to remain composed, his eyes locked on each foe enforcer while silently recalculating his next move. The stakes were personal. This was his home, and his son was the collateral in a plot steeped in criminal misdirection. The scene had shifted from a mere burglary to an all-out challenge to the invaders' ostensible power. In the eerie seconds following the initial invasion, Detective Mercer's instincts reached a crescendo. As the intruders continued their ragged performance, it became starkly apparent that the authority they claimed to wield was nothing more than a hollow charade. Their uniforms, emblazoned with HOA, were nothing but a poorly replicated costume meant to evoke compliance without delivering real credentials. In that charged moment, Mercer's seasoned eyes scrutinized every detail, and the truth emerged unmistakably: these officers were impostors. The sense of dread that had begun in the earlier moments deepened, not from the physical violence, but from the calculated deception. The impostors' actions. The clumsy gestures meant to mimic a forceful raid, the contrived display of counterfeit badges, and the theatrically deep, booming commands, all betrayed a fundamental lack of authenticity. Mercer recognized the incongruity between the real world of law enforcement and the mockery being enacted before him. He noted with a mix of disdain and resolve that these men were not here for regulation or legitimate inspection, they were here to intimidate, to coerce families into compliance through fear. Each word they spat out, each order they barked, fell flat against the stark reality of Mercer's experience. His training told him that real officers operate with a measured approach, an air of calm authority refined by years of serving and protecting the community. These impostors, on the contrary, exuded an aggressive timidity, a false bravado that could barely cover their desperation. The detective's mind mapped out the scenario in real time. These were not officials enforcing a minor neighborhood infraction, they were criminals, operating under the guise of administrative duty, seeking to destabilize a home and prey upon its inhabitants. The depth of their misrepresentation struck Mercer even as he maintained a stoic demeanor. He observed the way one intruder's hand trembled ever so slightly as he brandished a piece of paper that purported to be a compliance order, and how another's voice faltered momentarily when speaking to an unseen supervisor. These small inconsistencies, the slightest cracks in their performance, painted a clear picture: the men were fabricating a narrative designed to frighten the occupants into submission. In that brief interval, Mercer's inner resolve solidified. His focus narrowed entirely on the safety of his young son and the preservation of his home's sanctity. He understood that the impostor's facade was built on flimsy pretenses, and that any further delay in his response could result in irreversible harm. The stark realization that the intruders were mere charlatans intensified his determination. Mercer's cold calculation in this moment epitomized the essence of his career, a balance of swift judgment and meticulous care. Even while the impostors continued their farcical display of authority, he privately registered every detail. Their counterfeit badges, the shoddy cut of their uniforms, and the unconvincing timbre of their commands became the undeniable evidence of their fraudulence. This understanding not only steeled him for the confrontation to come but also laid the foundation for exposing the deeper criminal network behind this sham takeover. In that dimly lit living room, the clash between truth and deception had taken form. Mercer's mind raced, preparing for the decisive moments that would soon follow, as the true meaning of their scheme revealed itself with every passing second. The turning point in the unfolding chaos arrived with the deliberate calm that only years of experience could muster. At precisely 8:45, the atmosphere in Mercer's living room underwent a dramatic transformation. The intruders, emboldened by their facade, momentarily believed they had the upper hand. Their crude imitation of HOA officials and the clamor of their commands filled the space, a cacophony designed to overwhelm. Yet, amidst the frantic scene, Detective John Mercer's composure remained unshaken. In one fluid motion, Mercer rose from his position, his movements measured and deliberate. He walked slowly toward the center of the room, his eyes never leaving those of the impostors. Every step he took was filled with the quiet assurance of someone who had seen the worst and emerged unbeaten. At that pivotal moment, the detective knew that words alone would no longer suffice, action was imperative. With a calm yet authoritative voice, he issued a command that cut through the din like a finely honed blade: "Leave now." The command struck with an unexpected resonance. For a brief second, silence reigned in the chaotic space as the impostors exchanged uncertain glances. It was as if Mercer's voice carried the weight of undeniable truth, a truth that no counterfeit badge or rehearsed tone could mask. Determined to dispel the illusion that had empowered these men, Mercer moved deliberately to reveal the one symbol that differentiated genuine authority from pretended might. Reaching beneath the cushion of a battered sofa, he withdrew a well-worn leather case that had long been his silent companion. With a measured flourish, he flipped open the case, allowing the soft, gleaming light to reflect off the badge that lay within. In that charged instant, the badge did more than just authenticate Mercer's identity, it transformed the room's dynamic entirely. The once cocky impostors, who had been strutting with misplaced confidence, found themselves caught off guard by the stark evidence of real law enforcement. One of the impostors' eyes widened as he registered the authenticity of the badge, a tangible reminder that their charade could not withstand the scrutiny of genuine authority. Their bravado faltered, replaced by uncertainty and a palpable sense of panic. The air, thick moments before with the oppressive weight of staged power, began to shift. Mercer's calm and deliberate act of revealing his badge was more than a mere formality, it was a statement of reclaimed control. Each impostor, realizing they had overstepped a line, hesitated for a heartbeat too long. Their previous bluster, once fueled by false authority, now seemed laughable in the presence of a man who had dedicated his life to upholding justice. The subtle sounds of shifting feet and hurried, whispered commands filled the room as the intruders reeled back from the realization that their ploy had been dismantled. Mercer stood his ground, his eyes locked on each of them in turn. In that tense moment, the contrast between the counterfeit authority they wielded and the genuine respect that his badge commanded was undeniable. It became clear to the impostors that their carefully constructed illusion was crumbling. The subtle shift in body language, the twitch of a hand, the falter in a step, signaled that the balance of power had irreversibly tilted in Mercer's favor. In the ensuing seconds, the atmosphere was charged with an electric anticipation. The impostors, now visibly unsettled, began to mumble amongst themselves, trying desperately to muster back the confidence that had once driven their assault. But every gesture, every whispered exchange, was marked by the dawning horror that they had confronted not mere civilians, but a seasoned detective with the full backing of the law. Mercer's controlled demeanor did not waver. His posture was relaxed yet authoritative, communicating in no uncertain terms that there would be no further allowance for the impostor's fraudulent behavior. The living room, once a sanctuary invaded by chaos, had now become a stage for the reassertion of rightful power. His simple act, revealing his badge, had forced the intruders to confront the stark reality: they had intruded into a domain where deception and cowardice had no place, and where true authority would always prevail. As the moments stretched on, the imposter's eyes darted nervously around the room, each seeking an escape route from the inevitable repercussions. The turning point was complete. In that charged, defining moment, Detective John Mercer had not only reclaimed his home but had also sent a clear, resounding message, a message that real authority, as embodied in his badge and steadfast resolve, could silence even the most brazen of imposters. In the wake of that pivotal revelation, the situation escalated rapidly as Detective John Mercer shifted from quiet authority to decisive action. At 11:07, the atmosphere in his home hung heavy with tension. The imposters, having had their charade exposed, were no longer the ones dictating the terms of the encounter. Now, they found themselves at the mercy of a man whose every instinct had been honed over decades of dedicated service. Mercer's eyes, sharp with resolve, surveyed the room as he prepared to neutralize the threat with precision and care. Without a moment of hesitation, Mercer sprang into action. In a scene reminiscent of carefully choreographed training exercises, he moved with deliberate urgency. One of the imposters, startled and disoriented by the sudden turn of events, bolted for the exit. His hurried dash across the room was marked by a clattering collision with a standing lamp, a futile attempt to escape that ended in a painful tumble onto the carpeted floor. Mercer allowed this brief flight to occur without immediate intervention, knowing that his focus needed to remain on the threat still within reach. The second imposter, emboldened by a misguided sense of invincibility, attempted to close the distance by advancing toward Mercer in a show of brute force. However, his actions were met with the detective's expertly timed counterstrike. Mercer's training had instilled in him the art of restraint combined with calculated aggression. With a swift, precise elbow strike aimed at the assailant's midsection, he disrupted the attacker's balance and effectively halted his momentum. The blow, delivered with the precision of years spent in the crucible of real-world confrontations, momentarily stunned the aggressor, leaving him vulnerable to further control. The third and most dangerous among the group had been lurking at the periphery, his gaze alternately fixed on Mercer and the escape route. In a desperate bid to regain some semblance of control, this impostor drew what appeared to be a weapon, a clumsy imitation of a service firearm that clattered feebly against the hardwood floor as Mercer moved in. Mercer's focus was absolute. He lunged forward with well-calculated speed, seizing the assailant's wrist in a firm grip. In one fluid motion, he twisted the arm, applying a level of pressure that forced the impostor to drop the makeshift weapon. The sound of the object hitting the floor echoed like a final, defeated note in the symphony of chaos. With all three impostors now compromised, one fleeing in panic, one incapacitated by a powerful strike, and the third disarmed and restrained, Mercer took a moment to secure the scene. His every movement was methodical, ensuring that no further aggression could erupt. He reached for a pair of zip ties from a nearby drawer, a tool he had kept close for such emergencies. With practiced efficiency, he bound the wrists of the still resisting assailant, rendering him powerless and effectively neutralizing the immediate threat. Even as Mercer worked to secure the scene, his mind remained painfully aware of the emotional toll the events had taken. His young son, whose safety had been the catalyst for every split-second decision, had been traumatized by the violent intrusion. The detective's resolve was not merely about subduing criminals. It was about protecting a family and defending the sanctity of a home that had become a battleground for deceit. Every action Mercer took was imbued with a deep sense of responsibility, a commitment to ensuring that these fraudulent invaders would never harm another innocent soul. Throughout the confrontation, Mercer's demeanor was a study in contrast, a man who, despite being off duty, exuded an unyielding presence that spoke louder than any weapon. His training, his experience, and the quiet strength that came from decades in law enforcement allowed him to transform a potentially volatile situation into an exercise of precision and justice. As the subdued impostors lay bound and defeated, the living room stood as a testament to Mercer's unwavering dedication, a silent witness to the power of calculated force meted out in defense of what was right. In that charged, 88-second span from 11:07 to 12:35, Detective John Mercer not only neutralized a physical threat but also sent an unequivocal message to the underworld, that fraud and terror have no place in his community, and that real authority, embodied in his unflinching resolve, will always prevail over counterfeit power. The sudden arrival of genuine law enforcement marked the next phase in this unfolding drama. At 1344, the sound of sirens sliced through the tense silence that had overtaken Mercer's living room. Within minutes, flashing lights illuminated the street outside, and the unmistakable presence of uniformed officers signaled the end of the impasse. Detective John Mercer, still composed despite the chaos minutes earlier, now found himself transitioning from field operative to critical witness in a larger crackdown against criminal impersonators. With the impostors securely bound and rendered incapable of further aggression, Mercer met the arriving officers with the steady assurance of a man who had orchestrated every moment of the encounter. The uniformed personnel swiftly took charge, their training evident as they methodically moved through the scene. One officer approached Mercer with quiet urgency, requesting a succinct recounting of the events, while another began securing evidence. Counterfeit badges, the poorly constructed uniforms, and even the piece of makeshift weapon that had clattered to the floor during the struggle. Mercer's description was meticulous. Every detail he recalled, each step of the impostor's attempted subterfuge, was recounted not merely as a chronological sequence but as a critical piece of a broader puzzle. The officers listened intently as he explained how these men had exploited the respected facade of the HOA, and how their actions were driven not by a desire for genuine regulation but by a deeper, more sinister intent to intimidate and extort. His voice remained calm, the cadence of his narrative a direct counterpoint to the earlier bedlam. It was clear to everyone present that Mercer's experience and authority were not just relics of past glories, but active tools in dismantling a criminal enterprise. One of the officers, a seasoned veteran, nodded gravely as Mercer detailed his immediate, well-calculated responses. Meanwhile, the scene of the subdued impostors served as stark evidence that the schemes orchestrated by these criminals were far from isolated incidents. The counterfeit credentials, the cheaply made uniforms emblazoned with HOA, and even the crudely tied zip ties told a story of an organized effort to exploit neighborhood trust. Mercer's calm testimony provided the context that would allow the department to pursue a broader investigation into what appeared to be a sprawling scam. At the heart of the operation was the realization that these criminals were not acting alone. There was a network behind them, a web of deceit that had been preying on community members for weeks. As Mercer handed over the bound impostors to the arriving officers, he made sure to emphasize that the intruders' tactics were not only a violation of trust but also a direct attack on the sense of security that every homeowner deserved. His measured words, laden with the authority of his years of service, carried the weight of a man who had dedicated his life to protecting others, even when off duty. Outside the house, a concerned neighbor named Karen, whose name had become synonymous with vigilance in the community, watched the scene unfold from a short distance. Karen had been one of the many residents who had grown increasingly wary of the sporadic, terrorizing visits by these bogus HOA operatives. Her expression, a mix of relief and lingering anxiety, mirrored the collective sentiment of a community that had long awaited a decisive end to the reign of intimidation. For Mercer, the arrival of law enforcement was not merely a procedural transition but a critical juncture in the narrative of justice. He stood quietly by the door, his gaze steady, as officers meticulously gathered evidence. His mind raced with strategies that might expose the full extent of the imposter network, knowing that every detail mattered in a larger legal battle. Although the adrenaline of the immediate confrontation had subsided, the gravity of the situation pressed on him like a weight. The partnership that had emerged between Mercer and the responding officers was emblematic of a broader commitment to community safety. Together, they formed a united front against criminal elements that dared to masquerade as legitimate authority. With the scene under control and evidence in hand, Mercer's home, once breached by deception and violence, had transformed into a beacon of hope for other residents. It was a tangible reminder that while the threat of impostors might loom large, a steadfast commitment to justice would always prevail. As the officers began the process of processing and recording the incident, Detective John Mercer took a final, measured glance around his living room. A space that had borne witness to both terror and triumphant defiance. In that quiet, reflective moment, he silently vowed that the fight against fraudulent intimidation would not end with this single encounter, but would extend to every corner of the community threatened by such deceit. The arrival of law enforcement was only the beginning of a much larger campaign to dismantle a network built on lies, and Mercer was ready to see that campaign through to its very conclusion. In the days that followed the dramatic confrontation, news of the incident spread like wildfire throughout the community and soon captured national attention. At 1901, a palpable shift occurred, a transformation of private terror into a public statement of defiance and justice. Detective John Mercer's actions, recorded by security cameras and later disseminated across local news outlets, had ignited conversations about accountability and the misuse of power by imposters masquerading as HOA officers. The moment the video footage was released, headlines began to dominate media cycles. Phrases like, "fraudulent HOA raid thwarted by real detective," and "community stands united against impersonators," were emblazoned in print and online. Mercer, once a solitary figure in a quiet suburban home, suddenly found himself the focus of intense public scrutiny and admiration. For many residents, his decisive intervention had become a rallying cry, a beacon of hope amid the pervasive fear that had long gripped the neighborhood. In a hastily convened courtroom session, the evidence was methodically laid before a packed gallery of community members, local media, and even officials from neighboring jurisdictions. Mercer's testimony was a masterclass in composure under pressure. Sitting at the stand, he recounted the events with the clarity and precision of a seasoned investigator. Every detail, from the initial violent intrusion to the subsequent arrival of genuine law enforcement, was laid out as incontrovertible evidence of a criminal conspiracy aimed at preying on the trust and security of families. The prosecution seized upon Mercer's testimony with fervor. They argued that the actions of the imposters, under the false authority of HOA, constituted not only home invasion but a calculated scam that targeted vulnerable residents. As expert witnesses took the stand to analyze the security footage, testify about the suspect uniforms, and detail the shortcomings of the counterfeit credentials, Mercer remained the steady fulcrum of the proceedings. His calm demeanor and unwavering commitment resonated in every word he spoke, painting a vivid picture of both personal courage and institutional failure. Within the courtroom, the imposter network's reach was laid bare. Evidence suggested that this was not an isolated incident, but part of a broader, systematic effort to exploit communities for illicit gain. As legal arguments unfolded, the atmosphere was charged with anticipation. Each piece of evidence, every witness statement, served as a cog in the machinery of justice. Karen, the vigilant neighbor who had watched the events unfold from afar, testified on behalf of the community. Her account of growing fear and despair, combined with her recollections of previous harassing visits by the imposters, added an emotionally compelling layer to the case. Throughout the trial, Mercer's role evolved from that of an off-duty detective defending his home to that of a pivotal figure in a larger battle for community rights. His measured actions had not only prevented further violence that dreadful night but had also provided law enforcement with the critical evidence needed to launch a full-scale investigation into the criminal network. His testimony was so precise and compelling that even those initially sympathetic to the defense began to acknowledge the gravity of the impostor's crimes. As the trial progressed, the courtroom became a forum for the community's collective voice. The judge, presiding with deliberate gravitas, underscored the broader implications of the case. His remarks echoed the sentiment that the safety of a neighborhood was not merely a local concern but an essential component of a civilized society. In his closing statement, the judge condemned the actions of the imposters and affirmed that the evidence, and Mercer's unwavering dedication, left no room for leniency. By the time the proceedings reached their conclusion around 2047, the case had taken on a significance that transcended mere legal definitions. It had become a clarion call for justice and accountability, a public declaration that fraudulent impersonation, and the terror it inflicted, would be met with the full might of the law. Detective John Mercer's legacy was now intertwined with the fate of countless other neighborhoods threatened by similar schemes, and his actions on that fateful night would serve as enduring inspiration for anyone who believed in the power of truth over deception. In the solemn aftermath of the trial, as the sentence was delivered and the echoes of courtroom justice began to fade, Detective John Mercer retreated into a space of quiet reflection. At 26:59, the storm of events had finally subsided. Mercer, though visibly marked by the ordeal, his shirt torn and his knuckles bruised, found solace in the knowledge that his actions had restored safety and dignity to his community. Later that evening, in the dim glow of streetlights outside his home, Mercer sat on his front porch with his son. The cool night air was punctuated by distant sounds, the gentle hum of neighborhood traffic and the soft murmur of voices, as they both began to process the magnitude of what had transpired. In that intimate moment of calm, the weight of the night's terror began to lift, replaced gradually by a profound sense of relief and resolution. The living room, once the stage of a ruthless confrontation, now stood as a silent testament to resilience and recovery. Every dent in the wooden door and every misplaced shard of evidence was a reminder of the battle waged that night, a battle fought not with brute force, but with the quiet strength of conviction and the measured application of lawful authority. Mercer's thoughts were a mix of memories and lessons learned, the kind that only truly life-altering experiences can impart. His young son, still processing the trauma yet buoyed by the presence of his steadfast father, sat close by, an unspoken symbol of hope for a safer tomorrow. Together, they revisited the events in hushed conversation, each word laden with a deeper understanding of both the fragility and the resilience of their world. Mercer's voice, soft and reflective, carried a message that transcended the horrors of that night. True justice is won not through excessive force, but through unwavering commitment, measured response, and the courage to stand firm in the face of deception. The evening's quiet was punctuated by subtle acknowledgments of the past, a neighbor's cautious smile as she passed by, the distant reassurance of a familiar siren fading into the night, and the lingering thought that, despite the scars, the community had taken a decisive stand against fear and fraud. In that moment of quiet introspection, Mercer allowed himself to believe that the restoration of order was not just a personal victory, but a victory for every resident whose life had been touched by the corrosive effects of criminal intimidation. As the clock neared 28:52, Mercer closed his eyes for a brief moment, absorbing the stillness that had finally returned to his home. He recognized that while the wounds of the ordeal might take time to heal, the truth of that night would remain, a testament to the power of controlled resolve, to the effectiveness of justice when it is wielded with honor. In that gentle, reflective silence, father and son found a fragile, yet undeniable, sense of peace and hope for the future.